welcome. I'm going to get started because I come from a consulting environment. In industry, we start right on time when we do consulting, right? Because we go by the hour. So, well, thank you for coming. I appreciate you being here. And I know a lot of you here for extra credit, so this is good, especially during midterm time. So, I just want to reiterate, why are we doing these things? Well, first of all, it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, right? And this is where we go and we talk about cyber. And this is actually probably the busiest time of the year for me because I get asked to talk in a lot of different places. And one of my favorite places to come to talk to you guys. And this session series that I'm doing here are things that we usually talk about at the graduate level, which is beyond what you see at MC. And also, I encourage you also to come to some of my talks for the Cyber Club, because we're also doing stuff that we don't talk about at MC too, because there's a lot to cyber, right? I know there's one person who's already been in the field, and when talking to him recently, realized how hard cyber is. There's lots of different topics and lots of different specialties, and you know what, I've been doing this for a very long time, and the longer I do it, the more I realize I really don't know enough about cyber. It's really such a wide, complex topic, and when you get into the field, you're probably going to end up specializing, which is not a bad thing when you specialize, because there's just so much to know. So some of you will end up, most of you probably end up blue team, which is why I wanted to direct this presentation toward blue team. And who remembers what's a blue team? What's a blue team?
Defense.
Yeah, that's defense, right? Because there are a lot of different teams when you do capture the flag competitions, right? But in industry, the three primary teams that you're going to find are blue team, which are the defenders, the red teamers, and not every organization has an internal red team. If you're a really large organization, you can have an internal pen testing team. For example, I know people who work for like Capital One, and they're part of the internal pen testing team because they're big. But also there's the rise of something known as the purple team. Does anybody know what the purple team is? Purple?
Take a little bit of blue and a little bit of red.
Yeah, essentially they help red and blue do their job, help them communicate with each other. Because when you perform a red team test, a red test or a pen test, whatever you call it, all different terms, you want to basically improve the security stature of the organization, right? Their posture. And so the blue team helps take the results of the red team and communicate that to the blue team so they can make security better for the organization. So usually, I'd say more than 95% of you will be doing blue team. I know red team is really sexy. Everybody wants to do red teaming, right? Because of all those cool movies. But it's actually a very small percentage of the cybersecurity community that does red team. And red team is considered an advanced skill, so you have to be doing blue team for a while. And Alcine can tell you, he comes from blue team. You have to be doing blue team for a while to kind of understand how to do red team. So as I said, so my focus is going to be how to use these things called attack frameworks for blue teamers, since that's going to be 95% of you. So I'm going to basically start by introducing you to what an attack framework is. And then we're going to talk about the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, which was one of the first attack frameworks. You will still see that, and there are organizations that still use this. It's a blue team focused methodology. And then we're going to talk about the one that's really the most famous today, and that's called attack. Just curious, has anybody heard of attack? The attack framework? Okay, when you guys do advanced study, attack is going to be everywhere. In fact, after this presentation, if you're following industry, you're going to see attack mentioned a lot. Okay, it's really kind of become the standard for us when we're looking at how exploits occur. So I have this question before I start. I'd say, how many steps are there in a successful compromise or an attack? What do you think? How many steps are there? Say you're an attacker. You want to compromise someone or something. How many steps do you think it'll take you? Because you've got to follow methodology, right? I mean, they're going to follow methodology. How many steps? So give me some numbers. Okay.
7.
7? Okay, 7.
I was gonna say 8.
8? Okay. Any other? Anybody say more or less? So 8? Say 8. You're happy with 8? Okay, we're gonna pick 8. Well, MITRE has 14. Okay, so we're gonna go through those 14 steps. All right. So what is an attack framework, right? Essentially, it's a form of communication. We say it's a model, but what we're trying to do with the attack frameworks is describe how attacks occur, right? What are the steps that threat actor, that adversary goes to achieve some objective, okay? And the objectives can vary, right? The objectives of a cyber criminal will vary from a nation state, right? So if you're an APT who's out to steal intellectual property or to spy, right? You know, how are you gonna conduct your tactics, and the action or the objectives are gonna be very different than if you're a cyber criminal. But what we're looking at is we're trying to figure out what are the attributes of an attack. Okay, that's so we understand them better. And so one of the reasons we have these attack frameworks is to teach you how do you know you're being attacked. How do you know that you're being compromised? You know, in industry we have this term indicators of compromise. Anybody know what an IOC is, an indicator of compromise? Yeah, and it's basically you come in the next day and your Linux server has been updated, but you didn't update it with somebody else, right? That could be an indicator of compromise, right? Because what we found is that threat actors are going to compromise systems. They're going to find some vulnerability that they exploited, and then they're going to create a backdoor, and then you know what the next step is? Patch the vulnerability. Why would a threat actor patch the vulnerabilities on your system? Because they're nice? You go.
So they go undetected.
They're going to go undetected, but why would they patch it?
Oh,
What-
so,
Uh-huh.
what's it called? So, like, antivirus can't detect them and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So they can't fix their, like, attack.
Ah, that's it. Yeah, well, they're gonna fix the own vulnerability so that there can't be somebody coming in behind them and also to compromise that system. So that's a really obvious example of an indicator of compromise. Also, they provide a common language for us. You're gonna see when we talk about attack, when you start reading articles on compromise, you're gonna see that they're mentioning attack. They're gonna mention initial access. They're gonna mention the word persistence. So by developing this common language, when we see that in these articles or in these reports or in these advisories, I know what they're talking about, okay? And these frameworks, they evolve. Why do you think the frameworks have to evolve? They're not static. Although Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain has become static, but why do you think frameworks should evolve? Well, don't adversary tactics evolve? And their techniques? Yeah. So, you know, essentially the frameworks have to evolve. If the purpose of the framework is to help you identify intrusions, okay, you know, in other words, they're gonna identify how threat actors are conducting intrusions today. Well, if there's a change in the way that they're doing their intrusions, you know about that. So these frameworks should evolve with them. So the three examples of frameworks, and I'm only gonna be talking about two of them, is Lockheed Martin Cyber Kill Chain, which is by the company called Lockheed Martin. Have you heard of Lockheed Martin? They're a big government contractor, right? They're very big. Mandiant Attack Life Cycles. Anybody heard of Mandiant? Mandiant's very big in cyber. They're an incident response company, okay? They have their own model. I'm not gonna talk about them here, but some organizations that deal with responding to incidents, they may have their own internal model that really is customized to the way that they do business and they respond to incidents. And then we're gonna talk about attack. And even though they may divide up their steps and use some different terminology, overall, they're very, very similar in some ways. And I just wanted to add this, why you need to know this stuff. This was a position that I saw for a tier 3 analyst in a SOC. And look at that little box here. One of the requirements was general knowledge of cyber attack frameworks. And it mentioned specifically MITRE attack and Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. Among those other requirements. Okay? So if you're here, you know, you're gonna be learning about something that you may be dealing with in the future. So let's start talking about the first one, which is Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, okay? And one of the things I wanna say here about the Lockheed Martin kill chain, it's designed to provide what we call actionable intelligence, okay? Actionable means that they gotta be able to do something with it, okay? So these techniques, when they're observed by blue teamers, should allow blue teamers to go back and better defend their networks, okay? So this was actually designed against this whole idea of an APT, right? So who are the original APTs? Does anybody know? Huh?
Russia?
Or nation states. Yeah, the original APTs, and actually when the term was first coined by the Air Force, it wasn't to describe Russia. It was actually to describe China, okay? There was at one time where you couldn't say China was hacking the United States. You guys know that? That the government could not say that. And so they basically said it's an APT. And so, let's say it was coined actually by an officer in the Air Force. But then over time, there was a very famous report actually that was published by Mandiant called APT-1 report, where actually it proved that the Chinese were hacking us. Like, we need proof, but it was so conclusive, it was so convincing that we're like, yeah, we're being hacked by the Chinese for intellectual property theft. So one thing about this framework, that it provides feedback with you. Okay, so essentially, what can be learned in one step can be used to feed and better inform in another step to better improve your defenses. So, and it's blue team focused. Okay, so if you want to read about this kind of thing, or maybe in the future you have an opportunity to write a paper about it, this is the original paper that started the whole thing with the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, and it was actually written in 2011. So if you want a copy of this, if you think that you may have a need to know this stuff, let me know. It's a very short paper. I read it, and it explains what we're going to be talking about today. So what's a kill chain? Well, it really comes from the military, right? We're not really killing any computers, right? Or anybody in cyber, right? But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to describe the stages of an attack, okay? So I'll let you read that on your own, since we're not really in the military, and we're gonna deal with these steps from a cyber perspective. So this is the steps of the cyber kill chain. Some of these may look familiar to you, right? I mean, everybody should know reconnaissance, right? Because that's typically always the first step that you perform reconnaissance. But I know you've never heard weaponization or delivery. You may have heard of exploitation, installation, command and control, and action on objectives. When you look at these terms, you know what this is describing? Malware, okay? Because when you think about it, when cyber attacks occur today, aren't the majority of them conducted over malware? Who would agree or disagree? Yeah. It's not like, there's some bad guy entering your company, or some guy, who's accessing you through a back door and it's got some kind of reverse shell in real time. Typically, everything starts with malware. So when they wrote this framework, it had to do with treating it from the perspective of malware. So they actually, you can divide the steps into before a compromise, what happens during a compromise, and what happens in the compromise. Okay. But one thing about it is that in Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, everything is followed in a linear order. You must go from this step to this step to this step. And that's how the blue teams are looking at that. So if the blue teamers see exploitation, they're able to detect that. The next step they're looking for is the installation piece. It's different from MITRE, because in MITRE, it's not really in a linear order. It can actually go back and forth in different levels of the MITRE. So what's recon? I'm going to do, so some examples of recon are trying to get information. I say this in all my classes that, recon when it comes to conferences. Who here has ever been to a security conference? Anybody been to a security conference? Yeah. Which one have you gone to?
B-sides.
B-sides?
Some government conference.
Government security conference, yeah. So I don't know if you know this, but there's a lot of B-sides here, but in some of the larger conferences, if they know there's going to be cybersecurity professionals there, you may be a target. There was a recent conference that happened that it was divulged afterwards that there was a nation state actually trying to social engineer people at the conference. It was a country. I'm not going to say who the country was, but they found proof that this country was there trying to social engineer. And you got to be careful. Be careful of those free flash drives that you get at these conferences, right? They have all that free stuff that you get. Be careful of where you put your business card, because that's a way of actually doing reconnaissance. Knowing where you work and who you work for. Second piece is weaponization. Okay, remember that I said here is that basically it's malware focused. So in weaponization, can I change that? View? I'm gonna leave it that. I don't know why that got changed, but we'll leave it there. All right, so weaponization, essentially that's where you're coupling an exploit with a backdoor to deliver payload. Doesn't that sound just like malware, right? That essentially, and by the way, an exploit and a payload are two different things, right? Because an exploit is what takes advantage of a vulnerability. It's actually what gets you onto the system. Okay, essentially you're causing that target operating system, that target application to behave in a way that the developer really didn't intend. And once you get it to engage in that behavior, well, what do you deliver? Payload could be ransomware. Payload could be a keystroke logger. Payload could be a remote access Trojan. You get it? Payload could be cryptocurrency mining malware. It depends on whatever your objectives are. Okay. Now you have the whole idea of delivering it to the target. Okay. How are you going to deliver that malware to the target? Well, most common way to do that is via email, right? When last time I did a talk, we talked about virus total. right? And how do you detect whether files have malware? Well, that's the most common way of delivering malware. You could also deliver it via a malicious web link, right? You suspect that a link may be malicious. You could also use VirusTotal for that. How about USB, right? A malicious USB, right? One of the biggest hacks in the United States that ever occurred, where malware jumped from the United States unclassified network to the classified network by a nation state, was through a malicious USB. Somebody found a USB in the parking lot and was trying to be helpful, and that USB had malware called Agent BTZ. And they needed to get some information from the unclassified network to the classified network. And those networks, typically in the United States government, are not connected. Does it make sense? Classified, unclassified. So what they did was, they got the information from the unclassified, in other words, Google, and they had to get it to the classified network. You know what they did? They put it on the flash drive, inserted it into their computer that was on the classified network, and guess what? Launched malware onto the United States classified network, and it was a big deal when that happened. What was the United States response, or Department of Defense response after that? They started actually putting crazy glue in the USB ports of all their computers. Okay, that was their initial reaction to prevent that happening again. That's kind of an overreaction, right? That doesn't exist anymore because they realize, hey, you need USB ports. But that is actually considered, one technique that's actually still in use today, delivering malicious USB. So be careful when you find a flash drive. Even if you get it from a trustworthy source, okay, you've got to be careful. Scan it for malware, put it in, insert it in a VM, but be careful before you insert it in your computer because it could be malicious. Then exploitation, right? This is the whole idea of that malware exploiting the vulnerability, okay? And then this is when you're actually going to execute the code on the target system. Okay? The installation is the installation of the malware itself on the target system, okay? Then, depending on what the goal is, but some malware wants to communicate back to what we call a command and control server, okay? Why is that? Because you don't realize this, is what's installed on your computer initially is typically not very dangerous, okay? The goal is just to get it on there. But you know what? Once that your compromised system goes back and communicates with a command and control server, it can go download additional software. It could actually download the software that downloads those modules that help it achieve what it tends to achieve, whatever its goal is. In other words, its payload. What if it's on the system for a long time and it's time to update the malware? Do you think there's updates to malware? Absolutely, it'll be done through the command and control. But the command and control basically is the method that whoever compromised your system communicates with the target system. Those are especially important if you're like part of a botnet. You guys have heard of botnets, right? They could be used for denial of service, they could be used to propagate malware, they have many purposes. But how does that threat actor who's in some third country, control all these computers that he was able to compromise? And that's actually done through a command and control server, or what we call a command and control channel. And by the way, the command and control channel could be protocols that we see coming in and out of our networks all the time. Can anybody, if you had to say what was the #1 protocol that's entering and leaving your network, or give me the top 3. If you were doing Wireshark on a network, what would be the top protocols you would see?
TCP.
Yeah, how about application layer protocols? Definitely TCP, but how about at the application layer? How about DNS? What do you think? You think you'd see DNS? Sure, absolutely. You see a lot of DNS. Anything else? Huh? Well, TLS, how about TLS? You see, right? If you're going out to websites, encrypted TLS, okay? How about ICMP? Okay, so what'll happen is a lot of this command control will happen over protocols. The hacker will use protocols that are commonly going in and out of the network so that they can't be detected. And it's especially great if they're encrypted too, because that way you can't have any visibility into what's going on in the network. And then action on objectives is accomplishing their goal. Has anybody ever heard this term, hands-on keyboard access? Have you heard that term? So in other words, the hacker or the attacker is controlling your system as if he is at your keyboard. But you know what? He's somewhere else. Maybe he's at the beach. Is that correct? Maybe he's at the beach, remoting in, right? Or maybe he's in his bathtub, listening to classical music with candles in the background, right? He can be anywhere. He could be at Starbucks, okay? But the point is that it looks like he's on your computer, but actually, he's actually somewhere else. So why do you want to know this kill chain? Basically, you want to know these steps. Blue teamers know to better protect their organizations. Okay. Also, since it's linear, if you can detect the compromise the earlier, you can stop it earlier. You understand what's going on in the kill chain. Okay. However, you got to be looking at what's going on in your network. And I'll tell you right now, a lot of organizations are not very good at knowing what's going on in your network. In fact, does anybody know the name of the department in most organizations whose job it is to know what's going on in your network? Who does that? Who monitors what's going on in your network? I know, but there's a department. It's called your NOC and your SOC. Network Operations Center, okay, your Security Operations Center. Has anybody seen these, like even if you see it on TV where they have all the big TVs on the walls with CNN going on, they'll have Wireshark, they'll have, maybe the interface to their firewall alerts or their SIM, that actually would be the NOC and the SOC. Usually they're together, the Network Operations Center. So there are people in large enterprise that are actually looking at all the traffic that's going on, looking for this stuff. And if you have any questions, let me know. Okay. So the next one is MITRE attack framework. Okay, it stands for adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. Okay, and notice that it actually is similar to. Oh yes, sir.
Yeah. So when we transmitting the information always encrypted, right?
Not necessarily. It's not necessary because some hackers, because when you encrypt something, you have the challenge of managing your keys. So for example, hackers could also use compression. You know what I mean? Because when you compress something, it's harder to see. Also, they may use algorithms like base 64 to obfuscate their data. So they're using techniques so that you can't see what they're doing, but it could be more than encryption. If they're going to use encryption, they're going to do something like TLS. Like, something that's normally going in and out of the network, but it's not always encrypted. But it'll be obfuscated in some way. Could be in the clear. But this is why, threat actors, when they get into your network, they're gonna know what you're doing. They're gonna know, one of the first things they do in the network is they're gonna recon inside your network. What's the security they have inside? You ever heard that term lateral movement, right? So, they're gonna have an understanding, they're gonna figure out before they do anything dangerous, anything that can lead to detection, they gotta figure out what your security posture is. So they're gonna do a recon of inside your network to try to understand what are the security tools. Do you know that just running a command like who am I on a Linux server could set off alerts? Did you guys know that? You know that command who am I? Windows and Linux? That would set off an alert on in a SOC. Because when a threat actor compromises a system, okay, and he's on there, he's typically the only person needs to know who am I logged in as right now. And he does the who am I. There's a term for that. It's called living off the land techniques. These are commands that hackers, when they exploit a target system, they're going to run commands that are already on those systems. That would be fine. I had a friend who worked for Capital One, and he told me that he ran a NetStat in his organization. He got contacted later on by the SOC to confirm that that was a legitimate command that he was running. That was legit. Think about this NetStat. Okay, so. Because of these living off the land techniques. I also heard in a podcast about hackers when they want it ready to exfiltrate their data, to drop stuff, take it out, they like to use their own tools, like it's not what's built in, and that they caught one guy because he downloaded WinRAR onto the system. Think about it, they don't use WinRAR, right? Typically in most organizations, they have built, when they do your image, they've approved what you're gonna use, right? And the fact that this guy wanted to use WinRAR to compress this stuff before exfiltrated, they found him because that set off an alert in the SOC, downloading of WinRAR. Yeah. So I know I answered more than what you asked, but but typically it's not necessarily all encrypted. The goal is to use the protocols that are already being used on the network. If TLS is one of them, then use it. But if you typically won't find threat actors using GPG to encrypt, because of the whole key management idea. The whole idea is to stay under the radar because, you know how easy it is to compromise systems like on TV? Well, in real life, it's not that easy, unless the network is really bad. The networks that are worth compromising, they usually have pretty good security. And if they are compromised, it's usually through some silly OPSEC thing. Like, I think it was Uber that was compromised because a threat actor got in and some developers on the share where they had the code, they had the passwords in the same share with the code. It was PowerShell. And they were able to use those, so that's an operational security error, right? I mean, that's like a silly thing. You would think you wouldn't put passwords up on the server, right? In clear text for people to see. See, that's an OPSEC error. Yeah. All right, so so once again, like Lockheed Martin, the reason we do attack is we want to have a common understanding of how attacks occur. And go to that website; it's pretty cool. That's the URL. And I do want to focus that it focuses on post-exploit. In other words, you've been compromised, right? Which is bad. Okay? I mean, this is why there's the trend. When I started in cybersecurity, you know where our focus was when we were defending the networks? We were looking out. So say this is the network here, we're looking out, okay? But what the problem was, well, we're looking this way, a hacker got in and is doing this business. We were so focused out. That has changed today. That's why we have the rise of these teams called threat hunting teams. Have you heard the term threat hunting, right? Now there are people looking in. You know, there's a term called assume breach. The new philosophy is to assume breach, which means you've been compromised, so start looking. Okay, not that you haven't been compromised, you don't start. You gotta start looking because you've been compromised. It's just you haven't found them. So a lot of these activities actually are focused on you've been compromised, or the majority of the steps, as we'll see. So MITRE's been around, I'll tell you now, it's currently on version 13. Okay, so we've had several versions of it, so it's been pretty seasoned. So where do you see MITRE? Just to show you where you see the attack framework. Here's an alert from CISA, and I know it's kind of hard to tell, but in that little red box there, it mentioned attack, okay? Then, if you go and you look at a little more detail, throughout the document, you're gonna see, I don't know if you see in that top line, TA001, T1152, that's all MITRE attack. They're actually adding links, and CISA, right, that's a government organization, right, that let you know about alerts. They are integrating into their alert mention of the attack framework. And if you look at here, it's saying, I'm gonna just read the first line. Frequently, CISA has observed APT actor gaining initial access, okay? That's one of what we call tactics for MITRE. And then it continues on, the next sentence it says, may have obtained initial access by password guessing, and that talks about a technique. Password guessing is a technique. Then it continues on, password spraying is another technique, and let me go to and then it talks about another technique, unsecure credentials. But you see this here, there's all references to get information on MITRE. This is a government document that's saying, hey, you want to learn more about what we're describing here? Go to MITRE. This, I saw this about describing Conti ransomware. And look, they were describing in this article Conti ransomware according to the tactics and techniques that we use by MITRE. So there's an example there once again. So now that you know about it, you're going to see this more and more often. It'll say what tactics, the top is tactics, and under each tactic, what was the technique used by this ransomware. Look, it even used Metasploit, right? Metasploit, which you learned, right? You learned in some of your classes. So it is a matrix, and at the top we have tactics, which are very broad, and underneath that you're going to have specific techniques, and then between underneath the techniques are what we call sub-techniques, and this is probably the easiest way to view it this way. So it's big, it's 14. It starts off with reconnaissance, it continues on, okay? You see some things that may look familiar to you. There's a point where the threat actor has to achieve persistence, okay? And they go on and go on. Then here's mention of command and control, okay? And then, near the very end, usually the goal of a threat actor is to get whatever they're stealing outside of the network. We call that exfiltration, okay? And then impact is, what was the impact of the organization? In other words, what was the impact of the threat actor being able to infiltrate that data? So, for example, if intellectual property was stolen, or PII, or HPI, what was going to be the impact? So within each tactic, and by the way, how do you know which one comes first? How do I memorize which comes first, tactic or technique? Well, the A becomes before E in technique. So I just go with the same character. So tactic, reconnaissance is one of the first tactics, and then you'll have a technique under that, and here you'll notice in this example, it'll start talking about active scanning, which you've learned about in some of your courses. And then if you want to get more specific, you can go down and you can look at a couple examples here. It has scanning IP blocks and vulnerability scanning. So what's beautiful about this, at me as an instructor, is that cybersecurity is hard, right? Or who thinks cybersecurity is easy? I'm sure some of you think it's easy. Nobody thinks it's easy? I know, you think it's easy. Actually, cybersecurity, if you look at it as its entirety, it's hard. And people who do cyber, and you look at everything that's involved, it's hard, okay? That's why we keep, and you can talk to Alucine here, because he's been in the field, he knows what he's talking about. It's actually very difficult. But what I was really excited about this is in teaching cyber, is that this was the first model that it came across where we could go and see specific examples. If this threat actor is using this kind of malware, what are the examples of the kind of malware? This gets down to even types of malware that are used to do exploits, okay? So let's just say it's very, very complete. So when you look at the MITRE tax framework, it has several matrices. We focus on what we call the enterprise, and if you look on the right-hand side, enterprise, you'll see actually can divide it up by whether it's a Mac system, it's a Linux system. Also, there's a cloud section, okay? And this is typically the focus for us in what we do, okay? Now, if you're involved in the mobile space, okay, or if you're doing ICS, they have one for you. But this is basically covers everything that we are teaching here in this program, and probably where you guys are going to be working. So these are the 14 tactics, and let's go describe them. But know that they're not followed in the same order. You don't have attacker in Lockheed Martin. You go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? In here in attack, a threat actor can go back and forth. Okay. And there is no tactic is more important than the other. So recon, this is one everyone's always familiar with, because before you do any attack, you have to recon your target, right? Actually, for anything, right? When you buy a car, don't you do this research on your car? What am I going to buy? Am I going to buy that Beamer, or am I going to buy that Mercedes, right? That decision you guys have to make all the time, right? Lucine's one of them. So, Beamer or Mercedes, I got to do my recon, right? So buying a house, or anything that you do that requires a lot of resources, typically you're going to do some kind of research or recon on that. So that's going to be number one, okay? Now these techniques are either passive or active. Passive are the easy ones, right? Active ones are a little more challenging, because the active techniques, that's where you risk detection, right? That's when you're actually interacting with the target. So if you go into MITRE, it'll give you a list of all the active scanning techniques, all the passive scanning techniques that you could use here. And the information that can be used here is actually leads to further additional reconnaissance, right? So you want to try to have a good profile of the organization before you compromise them. For example, wouldn't you want to know, how big their cybersecurity staff is? What are the skill sets? Are they on the cloud? Are they mostly, are their servers mostly on Linux, on Windows? Hey, and if they're on Windows, maybe what kind of versions they are? Some of that stuff may be difficult to find, but sometimes you go onto LinkedIn, and there's some people on LinkedIn that tells you a lot about their organization. I did a presentation recently where I found a firewall administrator who on his LinkedIn said his organization and the exact make and models of his firewalls. Now, is that a good idea? Yeah, I know. Is that a good idea? It's in a presentation. I'm like, are you kidding me? If you work for the government, some government agencies, you're not allowed to have a LinkedIn account. Yeah, because, you could leak information. But, LinkedIn is a real good source of information for recon. If I'm targeting an organization, if I can find employees, IT employees with LinkedIn account, I'm able to get clues, right? Oh, I'm the Red Hat server admin at company A. Oh, there you go. I got something really important, that they have Red Hat servers as opposed to some kind of other servers. You know what I'm saying? Or I'm the Windows server admin, or I manage all the Cisco switches. You know what I'm saying? An attacker typically is going to build a technical profile of their target. And why do they want to have a technical profile? Because it helps them further exploit them later, right? I mean, I'm not going to be looking, if I know that target has Linux servers, and I want to try to research what the possible exploits are, well, it'd be great to know that I'm looking for Red Hat Linux exploits as opposed to CentOS Linux exploits. See what I'm saying? So gathering that information helps them in the attack. Resource development, and the next step here, you're trying to acquire things that will help you in the next stage of your attack. For example, you may buy or steal code signing certificates, okay? How would that help you? Buying or stealing a code signing certificate. In fact, anybody know of a famous attack where code signing certificates were stolen and led to this really successful exploit that was historical in nature? When you think about, anybody think of any famous exploits that maybe like the United States partnering with somebody against another country in the Middle East, maybe? Stuxnet, exactly. Stuxnet. In Stuxnet, they were able to install that malware because whoever did Stuxnet, I have no idea who did Stuxnet, it's classified, so I don't know. But whoever did Stuxnet actually stole 2 code signing certificates from 2 electronic companies in Taiwan. And so how did that help them? Well, that helped them that when the malware was delivered, whoever was clicking on the malware didn't get an alert because it was signed. It just went right through. Okay. You could purchase domain names that you think may be helpful, usually doppelganger type domains in social engineering attacks. Okay. And you can also try to compromise accounts or the infrastructure themselves too, if you can do that. Initial access. This is where the hacking begins. Okay. What we saw before in the first 2 steps, there's really no exploitation yet. It's preparing for that exploitation. But this is when the attacker makes their first contact with the organization. Okay. But notice this could be one way. There could be other ways. Okay. But when you go in order, 1 and 2 are really not. It's not considered exploitation at this point yet. So it says here they can begin elsewhere. For example, an example may be by sending a spear phishing email. So remember, that's where the previous step was important, right? Because if you don't do the recon, are you going to be able to send an effective spear phishing email? Right? Because spear phishing emails, maybe you may be targeting the staff that do that are in the security team. I'm saying, so the information that you gather the recon will help you develop a more effective email than spear phishing. And this is the problem: if you don't do a good job in sending those emails, what happens? You just alerted the whole organization. We used to get emails. By the way, there's an email, IT would send these, that looks like this, that's targeting the folks in our company. Be warned. So, if you don't do good recon, spear phishing email, if it's not very good, it could set off alarms, and then you're alerting the whole company that they're being targeted by someone. There's the malicious jump drives in the parking lot. That's the example that I gave from that incident in going from the NIPRNet to the CIPRNet. In execution, in some attacks, execution follows a successful initial access stage, but in others, it can begin in the execution stage. So once again, you don't go in that order, okay? Let me just read this. After initial access, if it happens after initial access, okay, if humans, processes, or technology do not recognize the attack, then execution begins through technologies such as script execution, control panel automation, API access, or module load. If it happens at the execution stage, they can launch through WMI, third-party software, some DLLs, PowerShell, okay? PowerShell is designed to help Windows system administrators, right? Anybody know PowerShell here? We should cover PowerShell in 135, right? But you know what? It's the most important scripting language for hackers once they compromise a Windows network, right? Because you know what? Now they start using PowerShell commands to investigate their environment. PowerShell is the #1 post-exploit scripting language. We say that Python is pre-exploit, right? A lot of exploitation scripts are written in Python, not only Python, but once it's pre-exploit Python. But once the threat actor is on that network, they're doing their living off the land techniques. They're using what's already on the machine. And last time I checked, PowerShell is on every machine, isn't it? Right? PowerShell is on every machine. Okay. Persistence. Okay. And this is important because up to this point, the attacker expended a lot of resources trying to compromise that network or system. I'm going to say network because it's really a network. And you know what? They want to stay there. Spend all this effort. It could be months in some instances, right? And so, this is the point where they may be trying to install backdoors, okay? Anything that's going to allow them to get back in. Open ports on internet-facing devices. Now, they got to be careful because you got to remember that there's people watching, right? And so what they can and can't do depends on what they learned about the network during their recon phase. right? Make sense? So, and by the way, this is for pen testing too. In pen testing, you know, there are different types of pen tests, but if you notice that in Cali, anybody remember the Cali motto? Isn't it like something, the more silent you are, the more you can hear, right? It's the same thing for pen testing. When this is occurring, you know, pen testing is gonna duplicate how compromises occur by threat actors. Well, you know what, they wanna remain quiet. You know, remember, those of you who maybe had me, that Cali disables any service that listens, that can respond to a connection by default. So when you boot up Cali, there's a lot of disabled services. Why? In case the target organization starts doing a scan and it sees a response from a device that shouldn't be responding. So, you know, just like in pen testing, threat actors, they want to stay silent. They spent a lot of effort trying to get on there, and the persistence basically is designed so that if I get detected, how can I get back in? Okay. Yeah?
So how does an attacker like figure out what their indicators are? Like, is it harder to?
Well, the indicators are for the company.
Yeah, but like, how does the attacker know what the company's indicators are so that they can like avoid doing those things?
Well, they gotta, that's why they're in training, they gotta look around and see what's going on to determine security.
That's why they do records.
Yeah.
You know, you do your record, for instance, and you're able to pick up some of the things the blockers before you launch your attack, because you have to know what they have first before you're able to bypass it. If you don't know, just like Professor said, you're gonna create a bluff. You don't want them to know what you're doing, so you want to hide your tracks. So if you don't know what they have and then you try to enter, you get an alarm, everybody will know that, hey, this hacker, somebody's trying to enter our system. Then you get blocked.
And that recon occurs internally too. Once you're, because, right, the defenses that you're seeing from external to the network, they're different from internal, right? So you're gonna do a recon outside, right? But once you're inside the network, then you gotta do some recon too. You know, well, where did I land? Do an IP config. Probably the first thing I would do is do an IP config. Or an IF config. What's my IP address? Look at the subnet map to determine how this network is subnetted, right? Start, you know, looking, is this computer I'm on? Does it have drive mappings? You know, what is it connecting to? You know, this is where that net stack may come in. What's it communicating with? Do an ARC-A. So, you know, you're gonna do your own recon internally, and it takes time to try to figure out, okay, you know, what's there. Because before you start moving around, right, you don't wanna be detected after that, because once you're detected, you're gone. I mean, and then all that time and effort is over. Then you gotta figure something else out. But more important is now the organization knows they're being targeted, and guess what? They're gonna be more vigilant. They're gonna be more, and they're gonna figure out how you got there. They're gonna, you know, it's gonna cause a big stink. Let me just tell you right now. Everybody's gonna be focused on this problem. How did they get in? They're gonna be looking at this, they're gonna start patching every way you got in. There's gonna be a major response once you're in. And I'm telling you, when I say major, let's just say all meetings get canceled. And you know, in an organization, that's a big deal. But yeah, so persistence could be, you know, maybe, and what you get away with and not get away with depends on the organization, but just adding, you know, your malware as a scheduled task all the time. You know, there are different persistence techniques, you know, writing things to the registry of the system to maintain persistence. But just, you know, instead, if you want to get more, go to MITRE. MITRE will have a list, a long list of common persistent techniques like scheduled tasks, writing to the registry, and more. And that's what this is about, guys. We're not trying to make you an expert. What I'm trying to familiarize you with yourself is, it's like, anybody ever seen an old world encyclopedia? You ever see those encyclopedias that had, maybe in the library, do they have those anymore? Maybe not. But when I was a kid, one of the highlights of my, like I was 8 or 9, we got an encyclopedia. There was like 24 big books like this. Which means in the winter, you didn't have internet back then, I could spend time going through the encyclopedia, right? Think of MITRE as this big encyclopedia. You know, you just need to know the general concept, but when you're in the field, okay, you're gonna go and I'll guarantee you're gonna be researching some of these techniques in one of your compromises. So if you wanna learn more specific, you go to privilege escalation and you go look at all the sub-techniques that MITRE has. Because I'll tell you right now, you could teach a course on every one of these techniques, an entire course on everything that's involved. Defense evasion, okay, this is how do you evade the security mechanisms are in place in the organization to detect you. Here, deletion of change logs, code obfuscation, encryption, right? I mentioned base 64. That's a common way to obfuscate data, right? Because we have a lot of systems that are looking for patterns of information, right? And so say you're trying to exfiltrate data and it's looking for the format of credit card number, right? We call those data loss prevention tools. Well, a lot of times hackers, what they'll do is they'll obfuscate with base 64. And what's beautiful about Linux is that this stuff is right built into Linux. You could base 64 documents right from the command line in Linux. Credentialed access, now at this point here, the hacker was able to get access to legitimate credentials via social engineering, some other, maybe finding it on a share on some server, like I mentioned before with Uber, okay? But now using these credential access, typically gains some kind of social engineering, what it allows them to do is go to the next level, right? Because when you have valid credentials, it gives you access to things you may not normally have. And remember, when you're getting credentialed access, it's really not that, I mean, getting the credentials of the receptionist probably doesn't have a lot of value, right? You want to get an account that has some kind of privileged access. Even, I'm going to argue, getting the credentials for the presidents of most organizations is, when I had my company, I supported a lot of these guys, it doesn't have a lot of value either. You know, you want to go, because we limit these guys, even executives, they don't have, you know, just because they're the president doesn't mean they, although they give orders, that's for sure. But typically, we didn't trust executives because what you're going to find, and by the way, anybody who achieves the rank of president or vice president, believe me, they earned it. To get that high, they're working amazing hours, and they probably earned it. And then they got to keep it. That's the other thing. Because one thing I've noticed at that level, there's a lot of turnover in organizations because it's hard to stay there. But typically, technologically, they're not that adept. I don't know how to put it. And we usually try to protect them against themselves a lot of times. But the people who really have the power are the system administrators. You know, the domain admin to your organization has the most power. The domain admin, right? You guys who had NWIT 230 know what a domain admin is, right? You can't prevent the domain admin from doing anything, okay? And so typically we can have other levels of administrators, right? But just because I'm on the security team, I'm not going to have the same kind of access, for example, that a domain admin would have. Maybe I'll have the credentials for the intrusion detection system and the firewall, you know. And there's still advantages to compromising somebody like me, but really the domain, if I could get domain admin, I'd be a very happy person. Because domain admin has access to the files. You know, usually threat actors are looking to extract data, and you know the security team guys don't necessarily have access to all the data, but the domain admins do. So if you have a domain admin persons, that's number one. That'd be the best thing to achieve. After that would be container administrators. But there's different levels of who you might want to compromise. So here's we were talking about the internal recon. After an attackers gain access to the target, they go, this is where you determine what's there. This is your internal reconnaissance. You're looking for you. Now it says here, start scanning files, port services, or other components. You gotta be really careful at this stage because port scanning is gonna set off all kinds of alarms. I couldn't imagine you're a threat actor would have a brain and was gonna launch a scan with Nmap, because it's going to set off alarms. Typically, you'll only use tools like Nmap 1 to map external, internet-facing devices. Because you know what? Organizations know they're being scanned. So it's okay to scan them, because they know they're being scanned. But once you're inside the network, doing a port scan, and I know because I've done this, when I had some big customers and I had to do a scan, it'll set off alarms. So before I did a scan, typically I would let them know. I would say, look, I'm going to be running, I need to scan this computer, blah, blah, I'm doing blah, 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 explain it, they'd be okay with it. But even when they scanned the network, they would alert everybody. So I had a big customer who would perform vulnerability scans over the weekend, and if our subnet was a subnet that would be scanned, we got an email. They just want to let you know we're going to be scanning your subnet this weekend, so don't be afraid, it's us, we're scanning you. So, but by today, typically you're going to have to be a little more surreptitious. But anything that you could look at on the local area network to find out what services are there, right? What version of service, because one thing you learn about NWIT 246, right? And I tell my students, finding out what ports are open on a system is pretty useless to me. Would you agree? It's listing on port 80. If I want to compromise that system, is that useful to me that it's on port 80, or do I need more? I mean, do we exploit ports? Whoever just run an exploit on a port?
You do it on the service.
Yeah, you got it. We don't exploit ports. We exploit services. So what a value to me is not knowing it's that's on port 80. What's a value is what opens port 80. What is the application that opens port 80? So that I can find an exploit against that application or service. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So, like I said, that's why the nmap-sv command to me is the most important command, because that will give you not only that the port's open, which is a value, but I can't exploit the fact that it's 23 is open or 21, or I gotta know exactly what service opened that port, because when I find exploits, they're specific to a service. And you'll learn that when you start learning about Metasploit. In Metasploit, to launch a successful exploit in Metasploit, you gotta find the version of the service, right? It's not just, it's operating system, right? It's, what operating system? What, is it Windows 10, is it Windows 2000, whatever. But it's also always the version of the service you're looking to exploit. Lateral movement, this is also risky. So you've pwned the system, and then you want to start moving around, okay? Why is it risky? Because of risk detection, okay? But typically you're gonna wind up doing that, especially if you find you have to go try to make it to another subnet. Say you end up in one subnet, you do your ifconfig, you're on one subnet, most likely the servers that you're interested in compromising are not on that subnet. And so what do you gotta do? You gotta get to another subnet, you know what I'm saying? So that lateral movement can actually be pretty risky, and you want risk detection. Then, once when you find what you're looking for, you can actually start collecting the data that you want to exfiltrate. Because threat actors, when they compromise the network, they're looking for something, right? Typically, threat actors have a goal. They're not just like going around looking for systems to exploit, although maybe there's some script kiddies to do that. But when you're looking at really sophisticated APT threat actors, there's a reason they targeted your organization. There's a reason they targeted Alucine, because they figured out through social engineering that his accesses are the ones that we need, and I'm gonna spearfish him. And then once I spearfish him and I get on his system, I'm gonna try to get his credentials. And then I'm gonna try to use his credentials to go into the networks or the systems that he has access to, because those are the ones I'm interested in stealing the data from. So you can see it's a very long, very complicated process. Do you know that APTs, the teams that in APTs that do actually the recon could be in the dozens of people? Did you guys know that? Dozens. Okay, it's not one person doing recon. You got a team that says we're targeting that company, and there's a couple dozen people on it. You're gonna find this, you're gonna find that. They're all gonna be given different information, and it's all gonna be collected in a report that will be used for the actual exploitation. So you collect your data, then you wanna, once you can start collecting it, and then you gotta establish your command and control channel. How do you communicate with the system you've compromised? How do you get, you can use the command and control channel for actual exploitation. So you can use whatever protocols, and this is important, typically we're gonna use what's already on the network and is in common use. I'll tell you right now, the bane of most security administrators is TLS, okay? Because everybody uses TLS to go to websites on the internet, right? And what's the problem with TLS? The people looking at the network can't see in it, because it's encrypted, right? And so threat actors will very commonly use protocols like TLS, okay? And another thing they've got to do, by the way, to talk about this, is they're not going to be exfiltrating data to China or Russia, right? Because that's going to set off all kinds of alarms. So remember that they're going to compromise systems in the United States. I was reading about a compromise, actually in the last couple of days, where they compromised a server in Illinois. And the data was being exfiltrated to Illinois. And it didn't set up, and they were using all these fancy techniques, they were doing compression, encryption, but you know what? It didn't set off an alarms because it was going to Illinois. Do you think it would set off alarms if the data was being exfiltrated to some country that the organization didn't have normal communications with? Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of times this is why, when I teach Red Team, these, we call them pew pew maps that are out here, the ones that Alucine has out there, those attack maps, okay? Those are just eye candy. They're not real, right? They're not realistic, okay? If anything, I remember talking to the people who had the first one, which was Norse, and I said, how do you get your data? Oh, we have I spoke to them at a conference, we have all these honeypots around the world. And I was like, well, how do you select what to display? And they said, we pick a fraction of 1% of the data that we get in the honeypots there. a fraction of 1%. So you see, it's not really realistic. And I said, why do you have these? They said, because it helps us sell our product. Those PP maps actually designed for executives. To, and right when people come in here and they don't know about cyber, what's the first thing they're doing? They're looking at this, wow, are those real attacks? They're not. They're not real. It's just icing. I'm sorry. No, but we know that. But I'm not going to tell them. To them, we're going to say, yeah, those are real attacks. Send us more money. But yeah, they're really not. But typically, one of the things the threat actor has to do, which I'm running the map, is I remember one map that said most of the attacks against the United States were coming from the United States. So I would ask students, so does this mean Americans are attacking Americans? No, because it was true that this IP addresses that were involved in the attacks were American IP addresses. They were compromised computers from other nation states. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? A nation state, like if I'm gonna attack something in Russia, my goal would be to compromise servers in Russia and have the attack come from IP addresses in Russia, not in the United States, because it's easy to detect, it's easy to block. Does that make sense to everybody? That's common. So if you look at in fact, there was just a service that was just detected called CloudZ, which was run by Iranians. Do you know where their servers were? San Francisco. Look up CloudZ, CLOUTZY. So when these compromises happen, threat actors, especially if they're foreign, most of them are foreign, they're going to and why are they foreign? Well, because they have, it's their goal, that's their job, right? They're going to compromise typically servers closer to their target for many reasons. And one of them is to try to stay under the radar, because communicating with a server in another country may set off alarms in the SOC. Why is this device communicating with this server in Shanghai? See what I'm saying? It sets off alarms. And they look at that in SOC. They're looking at that traffic file. So the command and control, typically the point is, you could use encryption, but the whole idea of encryption is there's a key management problem when you do encryption. So they can use other methods like obfuscation, like a base 64 or TLS. And then exfiltration, this is when we're getting near the end. This is when the bad guy wants to get that data out of there. How do you get it out of there? And they don't want to risk detection. So in this case here, they could also, and there are many ways to do it. I mean, one of the ways to exfiltrate data, when we talked about Natanz, it was because they were an air-gapped network, was flash drive. You get it out via flash drive. That's a legitimate way to exfiltrate. It's a little slower, but Natanz, that's how we think we did it. But it can be done just sending emails to yourself. You could send emails to yourself of the stuff you're stealing. You could do it via VPN tunnel. Okay? But the whole idea is, how do I get this data that I'm stealing out of the network and not be detected? And then when we're on impact, this is the end. Essentially, these are the techniques used to disrupt availability or compromise integrity by manipulating business and operational processes. And so, you know what? Maybe it includes deleting stuff that you've stolen. Okay. Deleting logs. I would actually put deleting logs under here too. So you can actually track changes to attack. They have an updates slide here. So there are people who, if you're going to be involved in threat intelligence, especially, this is going to be something of interest to you. But if you are also part of a SOC, this will be of interest to you. MITRE ATT&CK, they have a conference every year. Talk about geeky, right? Actually, I've been to it. It was amazing. It was the first time I got to hear about, in Latin America, the countries who were attacking each other in Latin America. I didn't even know they were attacking each other. And they had some speakers from Latin America, and Colombia's attacking Argentina, Argentina's attacking Venezuela. It was kind of amazing. So I encourage you, they actually have a virtual option to attend, but this is how significant, they actually have their own conference. And it's not just about attack, they're talking about compromising, talking about compromises in general. Okay. So we actually have tools and certifications now that are related to attack. So there's just a couple of attack-related certifications. I would encourage you to get a certification like this unless this is something you plan on going into. With certifications, I always say begin with the end in mind. We'll go find the jobs you think you want to work in and say, hey, what kind of certification does that job require? Right? Because the certification required for SOC would be different for doing, technical support, or be different for doing pen testing. And then those are the certifications you should be going at. And I want to encourage you, if you're doing cyber, don't get any certifications that have nothing to do with cyber. because they just, I used to do a lot of hiring, and you could have a list of certifications with Cisco and whatever, guess what, didn't care. We were only interested in stuff that had to do with cyber. Actually had I don't know if you, was it you that emailed me? No, maybe not. I got an email from someone who wanted me to look at his resume. And be careful how you do your resume too. And he made a big mistake in his resume in that he put his previous work experience at the top and put his security stuff at the bottom. And I suggested to him, he's not getting a lot of nibbles on his resume. Well, if you want to go for a sub job, put that cybersecurity stuff at the beginning of the resume. And he goes, well, it makes sense. Because I was only getting job offers to work in a warehouse, which was one of his last jobs, working in the warehouse. Because that's all they saw. They stopped at this warehouse experience, and didn't go further. So actually, we're going to see how moving his cyber stuff to the beginning, moving the warehouse stuff to the bottom, right? Because when you do a resume, you want to get that. And I said to my classes, when I used to read resumes, I would get like one job we had 26 resumes. We're not going to interview 26 people, right? And by the way, 26 that got us from HR. Who knows how many HR got? HR looked at what they probably got 100, and they saw these are the ones that qualified. So we got 26. We're going to interview 6. You know how long I spent on that resume? These 26 resumes?
30 seconds.
Yeah, about 30 seconds. Not even a minute. I basically was looking for key stuff. Next. Oh, this is a good one. And I was just looking for key stuff. I wasn't reading the whole resume. Now, you want to have a good resume as if we're reading it, because if we find a typo, one typo, that's the denial policy. You know that, right? One typo, that's denied. Did you guys know that? That's frequent with people resumes. Yeah, one typo. Yeah, well, because we say the resume is the best representation of you, and you didn't notice there was a typo here? Denied. So, yeah, resumes are very tricky. So definitely, like the certifications, keep them focused on cyber. Look at what the jobs you want. I said, don't do an attack certification unless you want to work in a SOC, or if you've seen, like in the beginning where I had the job description where it said knowledge of the framework. Don't waste your time. All right, do we have any questions?
Before you start throwing your questions, I would like to add to what Professor has been explaining about the MITRE attack framework. I can assure you guys that you are getting this knowledge at the right time. The MITRE attack framework is currently a big deal in the federal government, and it's rolling out in its implementation stage. So if you're going out there as a security analyst, the expectation when you're analyzing a ticket or a malware or phishing, whatever ticket you're analyzing, at the end of the day, when you're writing your report, you have to be able to include the tactics and the technique used by the hacker. So if you are getting this at this time, make sure you get out there, go to MITRE, their website, learn stuff, learn these techniques, so that by the time you leave this place, when you go to the workforce, you understand the basics of these things. So when you become an analyst, you'll be able to determine the tactics and techniques, and you'll be able to add it to your report. If not, then it's gonna be a hard time for you to be able to navigate within the system. So make use of this. It's really a huge thing, and every day when you work as an analyst, when you report, you have to submit to CISA, which is the federal government that is responsible for U.S. Health Administration. For whatever malware you're investigating, you have to send a report to them. If you send a report, you are not able to submit the tactics and the technique used, they're going to send it back. And when they are sending it, your bosses are going to see definitely that you're not doing the right thing, because they're going to copy them, telling them that we need the tactics and the technique. It wasn't included on this report. So you want to get yourself prepared. As a professor had advised, learn, go train about it, and make sure you get yourself ready for the workforce. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ellison. Appreciate it. All right, well, if you have I know we're running out of time, so if you have questions, just come and see me later. I got to cut off because we on an hour, so thank you for coming.